Hello, everyone. We'll figure that out. All right. I'm Chris Goodwin with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. Welcome to this week's streaming-only History is Lunch program, which is sponsored by the John and Lucy Shackelford Charitable Fund of the Community Foundation for Mississippi. We're working safely with the skeleton crew from our home, the Craig H. Nielsen Auditorium in the Museum of Mississippi History and Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. Our museums are open regular hours, and now is an excellent time to visit and avoid the crowds. Throughout February, Nissan is sponsoring free weekend admission to the museums, and that includes the new special exhibit, I Am a Man, Civil Rights Photographs of the American South, 1960 to 1970. Tomorrow at noon, activist, educator, and photographer Doris Derby will be featured in a program live streamed on the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum's Facebook page, discussing her photographs used in that exhibit, as well as her artifacts on display in the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. Finally, I hope that you'll join us next week for History's Lunch when Susanna Urel from the University of Southern Mississippi and David Pilcher from the Mississippi Department of Archives and History will discuss the Civil War and Reconstruction Governors of Mississippi project. It's a really interesting project that draws on a wide range of groups and volunteers, and we'll talk a little bit about how folks who are interested in being involved in the project can do that from the comfort of their own homes. Today, though, we are happy to welcome back William C. Lester to talk about turkeys and turkey hunting in Mississippi. William C. Lester was born in Memphis. He earned a BA and MFA from the University of Mississippi. From 1974 to 2008, he worked in the art department of Delta State University, serving as chair from 2004 to 2008. He has been executive director of the Dockery Farms Foundation since 2004. He also has a long avocational and professional connection to turkey hunting, which he'll not only talk about, but demonstrate for us today. Bill?
Thank you. And I want to thank Chris and all the folks at History and Archives here for letting me come talk to you. We'll talk about turkey hunting in Mississippi. It started a long time ago. These are some wingbone calls that were found at Kentucky Lake in Tennessee, but the same things could have been found here in Mississippi. And they were found in the 1940s, but they were carbon dated to over 6,500 years ago, before Christ. That's 2,000 years before the pyramid. And so how did it get started? How did turkey hunting in Mississippi get started? Well, folks were hungry. The turkeys were here. They had bow and arrows. The turkeys roosted in the trees, and on a moonlit night, they could shoot them with bow and arrows, and they could call them. I assume that the first call they used was a leaf, just a plain leaf. You could pull it between your fingers, hold it up to your mouth, make a kissing sound like that, and it would yelp like a turkey. Well, none of those stayed with us. Obviously, all those were just temporary, and they would rot and fall apart. The next thing I think happened, and I'm using my imagination on this, they would harvest a turkey. I'm told that one of their favorite recipes was to dress the turkey out. They had recently killed a bear. They'd take some of the bear meat, stuff inside the turkey. They would wrap the turkey with bear fat, take some of the inside intestines from the bear, strip them down, tie that fat to that meat and to that turkey, put that turkey and meat in the fire and roast it until the fat turned golden and in some cases black, where it cooked all the way through. Then they would undo it all, and the tenderest meat would be the bear meat on the inside, and the turkey meat, which sometimes is kind of dry, would be bathed in that bear fat. Well, at the end of that, there were no Kroger stores, so they ate every single morsel. At the end of that, they would take those bones that were left, they'd be clean, the leg bones, the breast bones, any of those bones had marrow in them. So what'd they do? They'd gather those bones up, they'd rake a little of the fire over with before they went turn in, to sleep that night. They'd put those bones on the fire, cover them up with leaves and dirt, and let that slow fire finish cooking that marrow in the bones. And so then what did they do? They do what you and I would do. Get up in the morning, and they suck that marrow out of the bone. And when they did that, look what happened. somebody made a turkey sound with it. Whoa! Well, the guy that made the turkey sound either was a genius or became one, or who the person who first heard it did it. So then they took the turkey wing bones, they stuck two of them together. This is a facsimile of one, just like the ones you see in the picture. They stuck two of them together with a little tree resin. They'd take the intestine of a coon or a possum that was green, they'd wrap it around there real tight, put it out in the sunlight, let it dry and tighten up, and then they'd walk around with a turkey call, just like this. And so they called turkeys with that, and I'm assuming they shot them with bow and arrows. And so this is the first turkey call ever used in Mississippi. After the Europeans came here, the Indians were using these turkey calls, and so they did too. And then in about 1870, a man named Charles Jordan, 1872 or so, a man named Charles Jordan decided there was a way to improve these wing bone calls. And so he was the first to take a piece of river cane and slide two pieces of cane together. These calls are notoriously hard to call on. The very first time I saw one of these, I was at Valley Park, and an old man in his 80s, 30-something years ago now, had it around his neck, and he played it for me, and I couldn't believe the way it sounded. And I said, "Can I learn to play it?" And he said, "How old are you?" I said, "Well, I'm 25 or 30. He said, "You won't live long enough." And so they're hard to play. So anyway, Charles Jordan decided there was an easier way to do it. So he took two pieces of cane and a wing bone, and he made the first Jordan call, which controlled the airflow a little better. And when you call on it, it has that harmonic yelp, just like the wing bone calls. Well, Jordan was the first, but there were really three people that changed turkey calling altogether. One of them was Charles Jordan. He did the cane calls. And in 1848, a man named Gibson came up with the idea of a box call. We'll talk about those in a little while. All right, so Gibson was the next one. He designed it, had a patent for it, and he was the first one to make those. The next one that came along was a man named Tom Turpin. He lived in Memphis, and he was born in 1872, and so by the turn of the century, he was making the Turpin Yelper. Cane is extremely hard to make work every time. It all comes in different thicknesses, different densities, and you just can't make it make the same good sound all the time. So what did Mr. Tom do? He got a lathe, and he got some coca-cola wood that's extremely hard, or ebony, and he started turning the trumpet parts. And here's one of his made about 1950. He started turning the trumpet parts and making these. He was one of the very few in the whole United States that made turkey calls, because in the 20s, turkeys were becoming more and more scarce, and he just was one of the few that actually made these calls. They said you could send a letter to Memphis and not put his name or address on there, just say, "The Turkey Man," and the post office would make sure he got it. And so here's is a very high-pitched sound, but it's a sound that interests turkeys. Very high-pitched and powerful. Here's an ad from one of the local newspapers and hunting magazines that came out about that time. As he was making these calls, his brother came along, Ingram, and started making them with him there in Memphis. And soon Ingram's son, Hunter, came on board and started making them. And now that they're all gone, Steve Turpin, he and I are good friends, and he still makes the Turpin trumpet and makes it very similar to this, sometimes different kinds of wood, but very similar to the way Mr. Tom made them. One of the other interesting things about Mr. Tom is that he was an experimenter. He experimented, and when turkeys got scarce, he started making duck calls, and so sold a lot of duck calls. Well, he had one left over one day, here's a facsimile that I made. But he had one left over one day, and he put a turkey wing bone down inside it, and it gives it a real hollow sound, and he called it a tree yelper. When turkeys yelp in the morning on the limb, they're squatted down real tight on the limb, and they don't yelp real loud. They just go, "Bawk, bawk, 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 bawk." And so he designed this call, which he sold a few of. It has that real hollow sound because it's got that duck call, for a bass. And I think that was an interesting arrangement there for him to do that kind of experimenting. Now, we'll get back to Mississippi a little bit. And so now we know that the turkeys were hunted by the Indians. We know that the folks came over here, and Charles Jordan from Louisiana changed the way turkey calls were being made, along with Tom Turpin and Mr. Gibson. And so then we have the story I'm about to tell you now. It's just one story about one family here in Mississippi. I mean, there are gangs of families all over Mississippi that had turkey hunting stories, that made turkey calls, that produced them. And, I'm not an expert on all these families, and so I can just pick one to tell you about. But in telling you that, it's the same kind of story that all these families went through. And so for this one, this is Mr. T.E. Pimble from up at Marigot. His family came here from Centerville, which is in South Mississippi. He moved up here in the 20s, and they started a sawmill. Well, he hunted turkeys down. He was a youngster. Out of his family there in Centerville, he was one of the only ones to hunt turkeys. And so he moved up here, and there were turkeys up here inside the levee over at Marigot Hunting Club. And so he would go over there and hunt these turkeys. And his grandson is my good friend, and that's how I got some of this information about their family. The next picture is Mr. Wilbur Pimble and Mr. T.E. Pimble. Now, Mr. Wilbur was not only a turkey hunter, but he made turkey calls, and I'm fortunate to have one of his. It's a little scratch call, and on the back of it, it's got about 8 or 9 or 10 years and dates and days where he killed turkeys that day. He wrote it on the back of the call. And so he actually made these calls, and he became fairly well known for making them. And he lived there in Marigot, Mississippi, and his name was Wilbur Pimble. Well, let me see. Try it this way. Now. It's got a sound chamber and a little piece of slate that you play it with, but it still makes that sound. 70 years ago. Now, the interesting thing about Mr. Wilbur is that he did what a lot of folks in Mississippi did. When the turkeys ran out up here in the Delta, he would load up and go back to Centerville at least once or twice a year. He had people hired down there to catch wild turkeys because they had more of them than we do. And then he would truck them back up here, and he would turn them loose at Hurricane Point, Marigot Hunting Club, and on Beulah Island. And he wasn't the only one that did that. There were other families that did that. But that shows you how interested these folks were in having a turkey population. And that went on, for a good while. All right, now, his grandson, Pimble Davis, is I'd call an expert turkey hunter. I'm just a turkey hunter. But Pimble makes his own wing bone calls. And this is one that he made for me. This one says 2015, but I've got several he made for me earlier. What happened was that after I heard Mr. Buddy Smith down at Valley Park play this, like I told you, 30-something years ago, he was probably up in his 80s, and my friend Homer Luckett and his family and other families have Valley Park Hunting Club down there. And this old man stayed at the camp. There are 4 camps on the place, and this old man stayed at the camp they call Greasy. So I was hunting there one day, and I was coming out of the woods about noon, and he was coming in, walking this is a really old man. And I walked up to him, and I recognized him, and I said, "Hey, Mr. Buddy, how are you?" And he said, "Fine." I said, "What you doing?" He said, "I'm fixing to go turkey hunting." I said, "Well, I'm fixing to go back to the truck." He said, "Young man, don't you know that more turkeys are killed in the afternoon than in the morning?" It was about 11 o'clock in the morning. And I said, "I know that." I said, "But I can't resist going out in the morning." He said, "Well, you just remember that." And before he left, I said, "What is that on your neck?" And he said, "Oh, that's my wing bone call." And it kind of looked like this. And just like Pimble does, it has a safety pin on it. You don't want to lose it. You put it in your pocket, put the safety pin up on your lapel, and that way if you pulled it out and you got a little anxious and forgot it was hanging out, you wouldn't lose it. So I saw that. He pulled it out and played on it. Oh, goodness. I had a box call, and I thought, I can't believe that thing sounds like that. So then what did I do? Well, got in the truck and came home, and I called Pimble, and we talked about it a little bit. I went up there, and he told me a few things. And I went back home, and I had some turkeys, and so I gathered up their wings, and I tried to put a couple together. Well, I realized I wasn't going to live long enough to make it play good. And I could make it play sort of all right in my studio. But I get out in the woods, all these people that turkey hunt with me will tell you. They said, "We know exactly when you see the turkey." I said, "How you know?" They said, "Because you go, I said, we tell you you're looking at the turkey, and we get our safety off, and we get ready." And he said, "Because we know you're looking at him." And so, anyway, that means when you're doing that, then you can't make that turkey sound. If you're going, you can't make that turkey sound that good. So, I decided it had to be something better than that. And so then I started reading and finding out. I found out about Tom Turpin. I found out his grandson was still alive. Great nephew. Is that what he is? Great nephew was still alive. And so I called Steve on the phone. He answered the phone, nice as he could be. I told him what I was trying to do, and he gave me some pointers and said, "Good luck." And so I started fooling with trumpets, and I realized right off the bat that the only two constants there are your lips and the air. That's the only two. Everything else is different. The size, the length, how big the holes are, whatever. And so I got to fooling with the trumpets, and I got to realizing that the thing that makes these things so hard to play, these wing bones, is you can draw too much air through them. And you can't make them make a sound very easy. So I figured, how do you stop the airflow? Well, I came up with, this is one of the very first ones I made. I came up with these baffles on the inside. You can actually see it in that call, and you can see there are baffles in there. But what that is, well, they're holes that are bigger, littler, and then littler again. It's not really a baffle. It's a change in the hole size, whereas most trumpets are made with just one hole running all the way through them. So when you pull on mine, you hear how bright and clear it is? Well, I'm not drawing as much air through it, and I don't have to. And so once I started doing that, and I figured out how to make that sound like that, then I decided I start trying to make some for my friends. And then I decided I'd start trying to sell them. This is one of the first calls I made. It's got my name on it, but it's got the number of the call. This is number 76, scratched inside it. And my wife and I went to the show in Nashville, Tennessee, where all the pros are. And I took it up there, and they said, "You got to quit scratching the number of the call in there. You got to get it on the call." So then I changed and we're putting it on that call right now on the outside where you can see it. There are all kinds of different kinds of calls. People make all sorts of things in Mississippi. Here's one that is made out of a piece of cow horn. And it's a yelper, but it's also got, the mouthpiece is a turkey quill. And so it's kind of fragile, but that's the wing feather quill out of a turkey, and it's down inside a piece of cow horn, and you can make a pretty good turkey sound with it, but that's that shape. I have a friend named Kevin Lynch that makes turkey calls. This is a really fancy one, the turkey wing bones with wrapping on them, and it makes a turkey sound. A little deeper than that. And people make all sorts of unusual things. Here's a facsimile of one I saw made out of a shotgun shell. That's the trumpet part of it, or the part where the sound vibrates in it. And that's just simply the end of a shotgun shell, plastic shotgun shell. Now, people in Mississippi have been using all sorts of things through the years. And one of the calls they use the most, because it's one of the easiest to use, is a box call. Remember I told you before the turn of the century that Mr. Gibson designed it. Well, then Tom Turpin came along, and besides making these wingbone yelpers, he made box calls too. And I'm going to show you one right now. Here's something interesting I can tell you before I show you. Calls inside this stocking. Now, I didn't know this, and Pimble didn't know this. Pimble Davis, my good friend, we knew that his mother and my mother went to Stevens finishing school together. But, we knew that, and so what, And so right before this talk came up, I thought, I'm going to go up there and get some pictures from Pimble and stuff so I can make the talk a little more interesting. So I go up there, and he and I are visiting, and he says, you want to hear a Turpin box call? And I said, sure. So he goes back in his room, or his hunting room, and comes out with this Turpin box call. But he also comes out with this stocking. And my mother and his mother took a knitting class at Stevens together, all right? And he was born in 47. I was born in 48, so he got this one in 47, and I got this one in 48. How about that? And so he and I had exactly similar stockings and didn't know it, and I keep a box call inside mine too. All right, now, this is what Mr. Turpin made. Not just his yelpers, but he came out with a box call. And this one is real loose and old, and 70-something years old, but still makes a turkey sound. Now, as these box calls have developed, other people have come along, and when I first went to Nashville, a young man named Freddie Clift came up to me, and we were sitting there talking and visiting. He was listening to my calls. He said, I've been wanting to buy a trumpet, and I've been hearing you call, and I want to come over and see what your call is about. So I showed him. Matter of fact, it was a call just like that one. I showed him that. He seemed to like it. He bought it. He went away. Then he came back. We visited a little more and came back. And I found out that Freddie was the nephew of Robert Clift. Robert Clift is still alive outside of Bolivar, Tennessee right now. But he made box calls for over 50 years. And he made the one we call the last call. In other words, it's the last call a turkey will ever hear. And so this is one of his box calls. And Freddie and I, when Mr. Robert got ill and couldn't come to the show anymore, Freddie helps me at the national show every year. But this is one of his Uncle Robert's calls, the last call. And that's a really pretty box call, but that's one of the ones that Mr. Robert made. Now, people all over Mississippi are using these calls still today. They're hunting turkeys. They use diaphragm calls. That came from the old leaf. Remember, I told you the Indians, and some people still today occasionally, you can find the right kind of leaf, hold it up to their lip, make that sucking sound on it. As people have come along, they've seen that by using that leaf like that, someone thought about taking a piece of surgical rubber and suspending it on a little curved mouthpiece and put it in the top of your mouth. It's called a diaphragm call, and you just you can call on that. Some people use that. But anyway, these calls are still being used all over Mississippi today. Companies have come along to make calls. I know y'all have heard of Primos. They make all kind of turkey calls, all kind, different ones. This is a gobbler tube. Sometimes you can excite a gobbler by acting like a gobbler. In other words, if you call like a hen, and get excited a little bit like that, and then you do this. Oh, me. That means some attention is being paid to your girlfriend. And so to a turkey, you know, a lot of times you have to have a gobble tube like that to make them respond. As people develop turkey calls, they listen to the way the sound of the turkey, and they come up with all kind of unique ways. I don't have a copy of one of these with me because I've never actually used one. But one of the earliest turkey calls that we call a scratch call would be a turtle shell, like you find in the woods. You walk through the woods, you find these little small turtles that somehow or another have gotten upside down and, you know, died, and all the stuff is gone. It's a kind of a white-looking little shell about this big. Well, people are using their imagination all the time now. Somebody took a piece of cedar and thinned it down real thin and slid it into that shell, kind of in some grooves they made, and maybe glued it in there. And then they took a stick and scratched on it, okay, scratch call. And they scratch out a yelp, you know, with it. And so that's an early one. Then, you know, obviously all the shells are different. Obviously it's hard to make them all sound alike. Well, then somebody came up with what we call a pot call. And that's just a little piece of turned wood. And there's one that I made on a lathe. But it's just turned wood. A lot of them have slate in them. This has got slate on the back and anodized aluminum on the front. So it's supposed to work in the rain. That's one of the things about all these calls that we've been talking about. None of them work in the rain. So if you're going to go turkey hunting in the rain, you pretty much have to have a trumpet, or you're out of luck unless you call with a diaphragm call in your mouth. So these folks came up with anodized aluminum for these pot calls like this. And they simply work by just scratching on them. And that's what we call a purr. That's what these things are really good for. Turkey is purring. That means, you know, she's content. And that's a slate on the back. Turkeys respond to different sounds. That's another thing that people don't really ever think about. This is a Beeman carbon arrow. They quit making them in the 70s. It's a real interesting arrow that a friend of mine, Matt McLean, makes these strikers. Makes a really unusual turkey sound, and it's the only carbon fiber arrow that'll make this sound. You hear how high-pitched and squeaky it is? Don't you dare think turkeys won't answer that. I mean, that's a... You can hear the difference. You can hear the difference if you change to a wooden striker. You hear it? Several octaves lower. Oh, that's a good sound, though. Turkeys like that. Another thing that I think we can find interesting is that there are a lot of natural sounds in the woods, and turkey calling doesn't have to come necessarily from something you make. This is a turkey wing, and turkeys fly down, and they do their wings back and forth when they're mating sometimes, and they just flap their wings sometimes. And so when a turkey hears that sound, a lot of times they'll gobble at this. I have actually killed turkeys where I didn't call them with a call. I just called them with a wing. The first time I did it, they answered, and they kept answering. And a lot of times after you do that, you can scratch in the leaves beside you. It sounds like a hen scratching. It's a very natural sound. And so this is just one of those things that adds to the repertoire of, you know, what turkeys folks actually do. Now, I've been telling you about working on these turkey trumpets when I came along. And after I fooled with them a while, I just knew that there was a little more to it than just making a single call. Because I remember from reading that there are two types of trumpets. One is the Jordan trumpet. All right, that's a trumpet that has a lower pitch, a more gravelly, harmonic lower pitch. And then there's the Turpin trumpet that has the high pitch. Some people want to call this the young hen call. You know, you're calling like a young hen, or the old hen call. Well, you know, I'd fooled around and I got this trumpet sounding pretty good, but I kept thinking, you know, there just might be something else I can work with and do. And so I started thinking about Charles Jordan's cane calls. So here's a facsimile I made, and it's all right, but it just didn't have the power and the sound I wanted. Remember, the lips and the air stay constant. The only thing you can change is that call. And so I got thinking, what could I do different? You know, I think, well, I could control the air flow inside the call. Well, I thought, oh man, great. I'll just fill it with Bondo and I'll drill it out and everything will be cool. Well, I tried that and you have to realize when you're fooling with turkey calls, if you don't like failure, you better go find something else to do. I promise you, because that's all you're going to get right at first. And so I drilled that thing out and it sounded horrible. So I quit thinking about it for a while. And then I got to thinking about it some more. And I thought, well, if I could just control that air. And I thought, I can't drill a hole, what can I do? Well, a piece of pipe is a hole, isn't it? It's got a hole inside it. And I thought, whoa, carbon fiber arrows, they're all pipes. So I went and bought a bunch of carbon fiber arrows, different sizes, and I began experimenting with putting them together, one inside the other, and suspending them inside a cane call. There's a nice cane call. This is a Jordan cane call, and that's one of mine. This one happened to have a bunch of joints that were close together, and so I get this real interesting look with it. But this is a type of cane call, but it has carbon fiber arrows inside it, and it sounds like this. Whoa, you hear how loud it is and clear it is? Well, I'm able to get that sound because those carbon fiber arrows are fitted inside each other and they slow the air down coming to your mouth. The other thing that I soon realized is that the end of these wing bone calls is just hard to get on your lip. The sound comes from these trumpets. The sound comes from your lip spreading out over that hole when you put it in your mouth. There's nothing inside the call to make the sound. It's your vibrating lip. So I thought, you know, it would be better if I could flatten out my lip. And so instead of making my calls rounded or at angles, which a lot of trumpet makers do, I think they think that makes their calls more harmonic. It's hard for me to make them make the right sound, so I just flatten the top out, perfectly flat, you know, kind of like a pie plate. So when you stick it in your mouth, anywhere you put it, it's going to make a turkey sound. And that idea came to me. So then once I got the carbon fiber arrows together and I got the mouthpiece together, then, you know, things got a lot better. Now, there are still many types of turkey calls that are interesting. This is a little handheld, it's called a doo-rah turkey call. And they put it together, it's got a little scratch in it. Now, I don't know if you think that sounds like a turkey, but you'd be surprised, turkeys answer it sometimes. And it's got 3 little finger holes in it, and it simply slides back. There's a spring in it, see? That sounds kind of like a turkey. And so a lot of times when we're talking about all these things, turkeys like to hear something different. They get used to hearing the same turkeys yelping every day, and so a lot of times when you sound different or you sound like a different turkey, a lot of times they'll answer you. People get to calling turkeys in areas where turkeys hear a lot of calls, a lot of diaphragm calls, or a lot of box calls. Then they'll quit answering them. You know, they just won't answer anymore. And so I think that's one of the reasons that this trumpet call has taken on such an interest with people. Is not because it's magic, but because it's unique. Doesn't sound like anything else. This is a call that lots of Mississippians carry. It's called a Lynch foolproof call. And it was made in Mississippi here for a long time. And the reason it says foolproof is because, unlike Mr. Roberts' call, it's got the same height of the edges on both sides. This one is foolproof. It's got a high edge on one side, see it? And a low on the other, so when you call with it, it stops up against the edge of the call for you. It actually sounds pretty good. And that's a Lynch box call made here in Mississippi at Liberty. And a lot of people play it like this. But they call it running. You know, they're going to run the call. I call it playing. Anyway, that's a good sounding call. One of the things that, well, wait a minute, here's a little pocket call. This fits in your pocket. It's a little scratch call. Sam Polk from, let's see, where is he from? He's from Arkansas. And this is just a little call. The little striker fits down inside it. And it makes a turkey sound all right. You hear how the octave is different? They all sound different, you know, because all turkeys sound different. Now, I know if you don't know, then you ought to know that all turkey calls don't work the same, and they don't sound the same, and turkeys don't like them the same. And they have certain sounds they like and certain rhythms that they like, and when you're turkey hunting, then you have to learn to be able to, work with those certain sounds and rhythms. Now, there's another part of turkey call making. The calls that I fool with, that I make, are hunting calls. I worked for the old Oxford blacksmith in Oxford when I went to Ole Miss. His name was Marion Randolph Hall. And he used to tell me, we'd be talking about different things, and he'd say, Billy, when you get away from me and you go to making things, he said, don't you make them pretty for nice. He said, you make them hell for strong. And so I thought, when I started fooling with turkey calls, I said, I dog, Mr. Hall's dead and gone now, but so he won't know it. But I said, I have to make them pretty for nice and hell for strong. And so there are a lot of calls that are real fancy. Here's one that a friend of mine made that's out of ivory and a piece of elk horn. And it's got a nice sound to it. But it's extremely fancy. It would be, I'd be scared to take it to the woods because I'd be afraid I might lose it. But these calls that I make, they're strictly made to hunt with. And they're strictly made to put on your neck and to wear hunting every day. And they don't need sanding or manipulating in any kind of way. And they're always ready whenever you're ready. We all wear turkey veils, and so these trumpet calls fit under your veil, but you can't be seen, and they work in any kind of weather. That's one of the nicest things about them. When Mr. Tom was making these box calls, he did all sorts of experimenting with the inside dimensions of these things. You can see how they're bored out, all right? And the thinness of it and the thickness of it and the kind of wood it is. Mahogany sounds different than beech, and walnut sounds different than pecan. And you have to experiment with all those different kinds to be able to get that turkey sound. Now, these calls are fairly hard to make because they had to be drilled so precisely. All right, well, what Mr. Lynch did, this is called a glued up box. In other words, the side is separate, the ends are separate, and the bottom is separate. All right, and it's glued together. Well, that takes the exact right thickness and the right kind of glue and all that for it to make a turkey sound. And so all these experiments that are going on are still going on today. And people are going to continue to make turkey calls. And as the new materials come around, they're going to develop new ways. Just like when I worked this call out, that's a piece of carbon fiber. I decided that a piece of cane, you might, run over it with your truck and crush it or something, but you're not going to crush that carbon fiber. And so it takes the place of a cane trumpet, but you still have the same cane kind of sound. And so anyway, that's how the development of that came along. With any good turkey talk, you're going to have, some kind of turkey story. You're just not going to be able to, get away with that. And so in 1994, I was down at Valley Park hunting with Homer and a group of folks down there at their hunting camp that their grandfather had started long years ago. And Homer called me about 4 o'clock in the afternoon and said, "Bill, hurry up and get ready. I'm going to pick you up. We're going to run down there and see if we can't roost a turkey." And it's about an hour and a half down there. So he said, "I'm 30 minutes away. Get ready." So I thought, oh, jeepers. Well, my gun was dirty. I had a model 1100 Remington. That's an automatic. Well, I thought, I better clean it right quick. So I rushed in there and gathered up my stuff. And it has 2 stainless steel O-rings in it that need to be cleaned and a rubber O-ring. If you put one of those O-rings upside down, the gun chamber will shut, but the gun won't fire. Oh, well, I needed glasses back then, and I was too arrogant to get them, so I just cleaned the gun, stuck it all back together, go down there. We get down there, he drops me off. I go creeping down through the woods by a big slough where I know turkeys roost, because I've been going there for a few years, and I sit down, and I call a little bit. It gets darker. Toward night, it gets darker and darker. All of a sudden, here come 2 big toms walking up the edge of that slough. They come up the edge of that slough. I see them coming. I'm thinking, oh, hallelujah. I'm about to kill one of Homer's turkeys. They come walking up there. They got up there pretty close, just about where Chris is sitting right there. They're looking kind of toward me, but I ain't moved yet. Well, I raise the gun. I push the safety off. I ease the gun forward and squeeze the trigger. Nothing happens. The turkeys have heard and sense something is wrong, but they sense I'm handicapped, and so they just stand there looking at me. Most time they'd run off. So then I say, well, I must not have a shell in it. So I got the finger off the trigger. I reach up and grab the latch on the bolt and pull it back real slow. Well, you pull it back fast, it throws the shell out. You pull it back slow, and the shell just hangs. So the shell's hanging out. I got it like that. I'm looking at the turkeys. I pull that finger loose. I wiggle the shell. It falls on the ground. I turn the latch loose. I pull the gun up and squeeze the trigger. Both of them jump and look at me, and the trigger won't squeeze. I thought, good gosh. And they just stand there looking at me, and I just stand there holding still. Well, they realize I'm handicapped. Can't do nothing. So they actually fly up and go to roost right out there over the slough. All right? I'm sitting there looking at them. I wait till pitch black dark. I turn around. I crawl out. I go back to the camp. It's full of all these folks sitting there. I tell them about my shotgun trouble. They take my shotgun. They all look at it. They pronounce it won't work. And so Homer says, but I can help you. You can have Daddy's shotgun. Well, Mr. Luckett had been a coon hunter, and he rode mules hunting coons. So he goes back in the back, gets his daddy's shotgun out of a special box, brings it to me. It's got about a 32-inch barrel, about tall as I am, a hammer on it and all that. And it's an old shotgun, old 12 gauge. He said, now, Bill, Daddy was riding hunting coons one night, and the coon stepped on a cypress knee and fell to the ground. He said, Daddy didn't get hurt, but the shotgun barrel got bent, and it shoots 1 foot to the right. I thought, oh, jeepers, 1 foot to the right. What am I going to do? So I take that long shotgun. I go back out the next morning, an hour before daylight. I crawl back in the woods, quietly in the dark. I get all set up. There the turkeys are, up in the limb. I don't even call. All of a sudden, they fly down, boom, right in front of me, right where Chris is sitting. I raise that shotgun up, and as I'm raising it up, I can't remember if they said 1 foot to the right or 1 foot to the left. So I just start shooting. Boom, 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 boom. I shoot 3 times. They leave with all their feathers and get away from me. I go back to the camp. I tell them the story. They all are fairly controlled until I put the shell in the shotgun and wiggle it, and it falls out on the floor. And it dribbled on the floor. They all broke out laughing. Some of them started crying. And there was an older gentleman sitting there. His name was Johnny Spinoza. He was a fine old Italian gentleman. He was reading the newspaper. He'd been listening to all this. He had a newspaper in his hand like this. He put the newspaper down. He called me Sonny Boy. He said, Sonny Boy, when it ain't for you, it ain't for you. And so I did this watercolor back in 1994 for Homer and them. Here, I'm going to read it to you. W.C. Lester almost killed this turkey on the afternoon of April the 9th, 1994. The below drawing was made for Homer, Jim, and Steve and Boyd so they could see what he looked like, so they wouldn't waste time trying to kill him. Because as Johnny Spinoza says, when it ain't for you, it ain't for you. So I thank you so much for letting me visit with you and talk to you. And Chris tells me that you might have a question or two. And so
They do.
I'll be happy to answer them for you.
Well, we'll let them take care of that hum. We do have some questions. One of the questions that we had was, are the turkey populations different across the river? So I guess the question is from the Mississippi Delta to the Arkansas and Louisiana Delta.
Yeah. We don't have very many turkeys in the Delta, except across the levee. Our turkey population starts again in the hills, around Greenwood and Charleston and all up through there. And South Mississippi has a lot of turkeys, but the actual farming area of the Delta doesn't have enough timber, and so there's not enough habitat for the turkeys. But there are some inside the Mississippi levee. And the inside the levee is affected just like Valley Park is. For the last 2 years, Valley Park was underwater. All down there by Vicksburg. Well, that runs the turkeys out, and very difficult for them to have a hatch. And so the floods are hard on the turkeys.
Yeah. Someone asked, you had mentioned at one point that turkeys got scarce and he started making duck calls. Could you say a few more words about when the turkeys got scarce?
Oh, well, so many people hunted turkeys back before the turn of the century, and there weren't any limits, and they hunted them in the summertime, the wintertime, and, like I said, turkeys roost in the tree at night, so they're fairly easy to kill. That would be what we would think would be an unsportsmanlike way of killing them, but they roost in the trees, and so people ate them. They tasted good. People wanted them, and so they killed off almost all the turkeys. And there were a few places in North and South Carolina that had turkeys, and there were a few places in South Mississippi that had turkeys. But the rest of the population had dwindled to almost no turkeys. Now, with conservation and turkey hunters paying turkey hunting fees to hunt turkeys and reintroducing turkeys not only to Mississippi, but the whole United States. And we have a really large population of turkeys now.
We have a question about a turkey veil. What are they made from? The turkey veils that you wear when you're hunting?
Most turkey veils are made out of some thin, lightweight nylon or some thin, lightweight cotton. And you simply pull it up over your nose and mouth and up over your hair. If you've got white hair, especially like me, the turkey can see that a long way off. And you cover up that so that if you happen to move, they won't see you. But I have an old friend who's 94 years old. We just talked to him the other day, Mr. Gene Denton. He lives in Clarksville, Tennessee, World War II veteran. And he wears blue dungarees to hunt. And he always told me, he said, Bill, he said, turkeys don't know what blue dungarees are. All they know about what is movement. He said, if you don't move, they ain't going to be scared. And so he doesn't wear a veil or gloves or nothing. And he killed many, 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 many turkeys in his lifetime. And so we wear these things now because we think it helps. And it probably does. It keeps them seeing your white face, and it helps. Yeah. Most of them are very thin. You can actually see through them. Some people put them over their whole head and use them as a mosquito net, because mosquitoes get bad too.
Right. We had a question about how far the sounds of the various calls will carry.
Oh, jeepers. Oh, look. Some of these calls, carry 400 or 500 yards. One of the big things about a turkey trumpet, Tom Turpin said it could be heard for over a mile. And that's with the wind not blowing now. So on a clear day, you do that real loud like that, and it carries. It carries. And that's what you're calling loud for, is to try to get them to gobble back, and you find out where they are. Once they answer back, then most of the time you go to extremely, extremely soft calling like this. Because you want to sound like a live hen. That loud calling, you just kind of shocked him into gobbling.
The question about the different types of materials that are used. You talked about the ivory, the shotgun shell, the different types of wood, and then your use of carbon fiber. Are there other technological advances that you're drawing from in that, and what are some of the other types of substance that are used?
Well, people have made calls out of fiberglass and different materials. I just look at the new stuff that comes out, and I just wonder, what can you do with it? And so then I order some of it, and I fool around with it, and I see what it'll do and what it won't do. All these things, even though they're new, they have their limitations, just like all the old stuff did. And so I don't know what new things are going to be coming, but there's more new materials. Carbon fiber is fairly recent. That's about the newest. It's extremely hard and durable, and it's hard. So that sound, that's what makes the sound so clear in these newer calls, is that the fiber, that the inside is so hard. You get that real clear note because of the hard material. On the old calls, the wood is drilled out, and so it's fibrous and fluffy and tiny little particles left over on the inside and pores, and so the sound is absorbed into that as it's trying to come out of that call. Yeah. And so on these newer calls, you don't have that problem.
We had a question whether you have ever seen a turkey called up by someone doing a crow call.
People use crow calls all the time. Coyote calls. Let's see. No, I'm trying to think of the peacock calls. Anything to shock a turkey into gobbling. Caw, 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 caw. The turkey will answer sometimes. Well, then he thinks you're a crow. And if you do this, he's going to think one of two things. That's a girl turkey, or that's a person trying to kill me. And so he'll hush up. He'll shut his mouth and won't call the rest of the day. And so people use crow calls. Tom Turpin made some of the best ones. I don't have an example of them, but they're a locator call. Coyote calls are a locator call. Turkeys hate coyotes. And a lot of people owl. Woo, 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 woo. And the turkey will answer that sometimes. Well, that's a kind of a locator call. And you don't have to be perfect at it, obviously, for them to answer it.
We had a question about technological advances for, really the question is, how long before there's an app on your phone that can call up turkeys?
Well, you know what? There already is. There's all kind of electronic devices. But to my way of thinking, thank goodness all those are illegal. In other words, I could go out and tape a turkey calling on a device, take it in the woods and call with it, and it would be a live turkey calling. And it probably would work okay. It might work real good, but those are illegal. And so you can practice by having an app on your phone and play it and call to it and back and forth if you want to. But I'm not certain that'll ever come into fruition. Have an electronic call. They allow you to use that on snow geese because we've got too many snow geese, and they're tearing up the tundra. So they allow you to use an electronic call to call them in because they're so hard to call in. But I don't think turkeys are going to ever tear up their habitat.
We had a question about whether there are any turkey calling contests in Mississippi and nearby.
There are. Last year I was fortunate enough to get to judge I was one of the 3 judges that judged the Mississippi calling contest put on by Mossy Oak in West Point, Mississippi. And I was amazed at how many turkey calls were made in Mississippi, all different types, all different kinds, and it was a real honor and pleasure to actually play those calls and look at them.
Yeah.
But people are still making them all over the state of Mississippi right now, trying to figure out ways to attract the turkey.
If folks were interested in finding out more about the calls you make, where would they do that?
They can contact me at Dockery, Mississippi. They can call me on the phone. That would be 662-719-1048, or they can email me at wclester48@gmail.com.
This has been all sorts of fun. I appreciate you
Thank
being here with us again today. Thank you all for watching from home or wherever you may be. Remember tomorrow's program with Doris Derby at noon on the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum Facebook page. And tune back in next week when Susanna Url and David Pilcher will be talking about the Civil War and Reconstruction Governors of Mississippi project. But again today, thank you, Bill Lester, for this. Look
Thank
forward
you.
to hearing more from you in the future.
I enjoyed it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.